They're going to be having a ceasefire.
In the fragile ceasefire.
A ceasefire in Lebanon.
A renewed ceasefire.
A ceasefire. A ceasefire. The ceasefire
Could fall apart.
So everyone's asking the question, will these ceasefires hold? But I don't think that's the right question. Here's another one. Why do ceasefires look so much like war? And even more specifically, why is Israel holding so much land in Lebanon months after signing a ceasefire?
The ceasefire has not brought a full cessation of hostilities.
Okay, so first of all, a ceasefire really isn't about precise legal language. That's not the point. And ceasefires are actually kept specifically vague to leave room for each party to kind of interpret things in their own way, in hopes of making lasting peace. But at the end of the day, whoever has more leverage is more likely to walk away with a deal they're happy with. When a ceasefire is vague or keeps falling apart, it's not because it was drafted poorly. It's because the interests of the people signing the ceasefire were never compatible to begin with. That's why they were fighting. So to understand the ceasefire that keeps falling apart between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon, let's start by understanding the basics of the Iran-US ceasefire that also keeps falling apart. Israel and the US expected this conflict with Iran to be fast and one-sided. They expected to win.
This regime will soon learn that no one should challenge the strength and might of the United States Armed Forces.
But it hasn't played out that way. Iran had way more leverage and staying power than anybody was expecting, which is why we keep going in through rounds and rounds of negotiations instead of actually seeing any real results. What does Iran actually want? For the fighting to stop without losing its position of power in the Middle East and globally, and specifically without being forced in a position where it needs US approval to act in its own interests. What's the US actually want? What it's always wanted: for Iran to have a limited ability to be a regional superpower and to completely lose its ability to challenge the West. And also for a deal that doesn't get derailed by the ongoing negotiations between Israel and Hezbollah being a proxy of Iran. So these ceasefires and these wars are connected, because the US and Israel are such strong allies, and Iran and Hezbollah are essentially two sides of the same coin. And Israel? Well, Israel's being left out of the negotiations with Iran. And as far as we can tell, doesn't really have much of a say one way or the other. So those are the clashing interests behind the US and Iran negotiations that are ongoing right now. And they're going to help us better understand why Israel is controlling so much land in southern Lebanon. It doesn't seem to want to let go of the fighting. Hezbollah is like a cartel that exists within Lebanon and controls a certain territory, much against the interests of the Lebanese government. Lebanon, like Israel, wants Hezbollah's military power completely gone. Israel and Lebanon are 100% on the same page with that. They're otherwise standing in between peaceful relationships between Lebanon and Israel. But ideally, Lebanon does not want Israel controlling part of its land. It wants to handle Hezbollah on its own while maintaining sovereignty over the entirety of its land. And I'm going to get more into the interests on the Israeli side, but let's just assume that Israel wants just a security guarantee against Hezbollah. They have reason to doubt Lebanon's ability to hold off Hezbollah on their own. Lebanon does not have a strong army, and they don't have a good track record with taking care of Hezbollah. So Israel. There are three dominant takes when it comes to Israel's interests. Frame one, let's call this the critique. I listen to a lot of news sources, and I was listening to a podcast that's produced by a UAE-sponsored outlet. So they tend to feature voices from the Arab world, voices that are critical of Israel. And the commentator was saying that Israel deliberately developed ceasefire terms that they know Lebanon can't stand on, so they have an excuse to hold more land. So that's the critical take. Now frame B, which is the one that Israel presents publicly, is that Israel just wants to maintain a buffer zone. They're simply looking for a security guarantee, and they can't get that unless they do it themselves. It's not a land grab, it's just defense for defense's sake. Now frame C, and this is the one that I find the most interesting. Yeah, sure, it's defense, but Israel wants to be a regional superpower for a lot of reasons, and they are a regional superpower. And it's actively trying to maintain this position, much in the way that the US does in the region, by having bases and alliances and military presence throughout different areas that can assure its security and its ability to keep an eye on the region. So of course Israel isn't welcome, nor is it present everywhere throughout the region, but it is present in certain places, like southern Lebanon, which is a Hezbollah stronghold. And the argument here is that Israel is leveraging the defense argument, which has merit to it, in order to maintain this status as a regional watchdog, keeping an eye on Hezbollah on its own defense, similar to what it's doing in Syria. Practically, like hard facts, Israel and Lebanon have signed a series of agreements. These agreements continually affirm each other's mutual right to exist and include terms like a phased withdrawal of Israeli troops from southern Lebanon as Hezbollah is disarmed, and calling on Lebanon's own forces to maintain that disarmament, eventually leading to a full withdrawal of Israeli troops. with Israel saying that it has no territorial ambitions in Lebanon and will leave once Hezbollah is disarmed and no longer a threat. So back to the question, and the implication, which is how reasonable is Israel being here? Are they on this conquest mission trying to take over land and trying to bully everybody in the region? Or what's really going on? These are things that people are claiming. It's things I've heard just regular individuals in the street say, as well as commentators, people in the media, all of that. Here's my honest take, and it plays back into the purpose of ceasefires. Ceasefires exist to give everybody enough safety and breathing room to negotiate a deal that felt impossible up until the fighting stopped, and maybe still feels impossible until the final terms are agreed to. And Israel is acting aggressively to protect its northern border, which as someone who lives in the north of Israel, I'm actually grateful for. But also, Israel has this issue, which you'll hear me talk about a lot, of placing its own immediate safety and defense needs above all else, which sort of makes sense, but it also means you're sacrificing something else. So what are they sacrificing? They're sacrificing the long-term relationships, its long-term standing internationally, and specifically deals and relationships with potential allies in the region. This is not just my talking point. This is an active debate that's happening between Israeli politicians, security analysts, military analysts. Everybody's talking about it. And while immediate defense is a valuable ambition, what's the cost? And how long is it going to take to feel it? So the real question is not, is Israel wrong for pursuing its own security? It's how much does Israel's pursuit of immediate safety run the risk of damaging these longer-term relationships in its pursuit of the regional standing that it wants so badly? And can you actually be a credible regional watchdog if you're fighting multiple wars on multiple fronts all the time? So while Israel has good reason for wanting to pursue its own safety, the question is, should it pull back a little bit on its aggressive military posture to make room for deeper relationships and longer-term goals? So I don't think there's such a clean answer to all of this, but at least it helps you understand what's underpinning all these discussions and all these headlines that we've been seeing in the news. And hopefully next time you hear discussions of a ceasefire amidst ongoing exchanges of fire, the purpose of having the ceasefire in the first place might make a little more sense. So stay tuned for more content like this, as I'm doing my best to make sense of this crazy region that means so much globally. Like, subscribe, you know.